Hello and welcome to another episode of the Construction Corner podcast. I'm Dillon. I'm your host. Before I introduce my blue collar badass, guys, share the show. If you get any value out of today, any good conversation topics that spark around the office, around the coffee pot, water cooler these days, go ahead and give us a share. For us, we don't run ads. We're not monetizing this. It's all to bring awareness to this great industry that we love called construction. It's to help bring people in, keep people here, make you better in how you do things on a daily basis. We do this live every week. So if you're listening on any of the podcast platforms, we're basically everywhere. You can also catch us live. We'll throw up a post on when we're going live. You can comment live, all that kind of good stuff. But guys, share the show, spread the word. We want to bring more and more people into construction. So if you want to share this with a colleague, somebody that wants to get in the industry, doesn't know what construction is all about, again, we just try to spread the word on how great of an industry this is. So without further ado, Matt, how's it going, my friend?
I'm doing well today, Dillon, and that was a great intro. It's a topic we've been kicking around a little bit, but really, guys, we're out here kind of shooting the shit once a week. I know there's people listening, but we want to make sure we're talking about things that are worthwhile to anyone who is listening. And this is how you can kind of give back, how you can play a part in the show and help kind of almost direct where we're going in the future with it. So like Dillon said, give us a share, give us a like, and we'll keep doing this.
Yeah, and it's everywhere, right? So we're on Facebook if you want to watch there, YouTube. It's under live broadcast. This is hosted on my LinkedIn. Again, we're on Apple, Google, Stitcher, Spotify, you name it. We're there.
Pretty easy to find.
So what are we going to talk today about?
I think today we kind of delve into a topic that we brought up way back when I first started back in January. And I think it's kind of the turning point of what everything else we've been talking about up till now is, and some of the issues we're seeing, but it's the differences between what I'll call quote unquote old versus new construction. And when I say old versus new construction, I don't mean like ground up versus renovation. It's old, like the old way of doing things, and the new way of doing things. And there's a little happy medium ground that I think you and I both kind of play in and can see both sides pretty well.
Yeah. And that's one of the big things, guys, is understanding both sides of that equation. Matt and I probably play a little bit in the middle of both of this. I'm younger, and lean more towards the technology side of things, but can fully understand and appreciate why contracts are set up the way they are, why a lot of things are done the way they've been done for a very long period of time. It works, it's proven, and people put policies into place so they don't get burnt again, right? Somebody got burnt somewhere along the way, and this is that 1%, that one guy clause that gets put into projects or a workflow that gets adopted because of that one guy. So it's the exception and not the rule on why we do a lot of things.
Yeah, and I think we're here to bust the notion that the way we've always done it, or we're doing it just because this is how we've always done it. That's not necessarily the way it's correct. That's not the best way to do things. And we all as an industry are growing and changing, whether we like it or not. We'll all be a lot better off if we can see both sides of it and take the good from the old with the good from the new and make this into the new industry of the future.
At the end of the day, we want a conversation around this topic. It's not cut and dry. Every firm's going to have their own opinion on how they want to move forward, which is what makes construction great, is that, there's not only one way to do something. There's plenty of ways to accomplish the same goal, put up the same building. At the end of the day, there is probably a best way, but at the end of the day, we can still, get to the same point. A lot of people do things very inefficiently, waste a ton of time, and other firms do it a lot better. Again, I'm not going to say a right and a wrong way, but I'm going to say that there's definitely more effective and efficient ways to get to the same end result.
Definitely. There's lots of paths that lead to your end goal. But why don't we start off and kind of touch on that one topic that we bring up, it seems without fail every episode, and the culture of construction. Why don't we start there and see where this goes?
Yeah. For me, the big culture within construction is loss aversion, right? And it really comes down to risk mitigation. I think is like the core thing that a lot of us struggle with that are in the industry, right? That are trying to put buildings together, that are trying to bring things out of the ground with a lot of money, a lot of manpower, a lot of resources. There is not as much risk in a project today as there once was, right? In terms of casualties and safety factors, but there's still a big, and as it should be, a big focus on risk aversion, risk mitigation. And that comes in all ways, shapes, and forms, from financial to safety to timelines to waste, right? You're trying to risk mitigate tons and tons of factors that go into construction. So I think that's kind of a big place to start, is understanding that mindset and why it's been that way. Obviously on the construction side, which I'll let you talk to, Matt, is safety, right? That's the number one thing. You look back to like the Hoover Dam and I think hundreds of people that were killed, in that construction project, to the Empire State Building, to basically any big construction, to now like a much bigger facility in like the SoFi Stadium, right? A multiple million square foot facility. One guy died, and it was after it opened, and he fell off. He wasn't tied in, and he fell off some scaffolding, right? At in the center of the facility, which the last thing you're going to hit's the field. So, from the Hoover Dam. So we're talking 90 years ago, right? When it was built in 1928, 32. From the 30s to today, so 90 years, we have made drastic improvements in the safety of construction. But that's, I think, the biggest one that typically comes to mind.
Well, and it's by far the most important one, right? Because you can't put a value on life and livelihood. And as a construction owner, having an injury on a job site today is just about the worst thing you can imagine. And knock on wood, luckily it doesn't happen often. But there've been a lot of changes made over the last 100 years, over the last 10 years, right? In rules and regulations. And some of them I'll agree with, a lot of them I don't. I think we tend to, try to bubble wrap ourselves through organizations like OSHA a little bit too much sometimes, but there's also a lot of good that is being done and that's keeping people safe. And even down to silly things like certifications for operating scissor lifts rather. 10 years ago, that may have been a thing, but I would almost guarantee that most guys up on a scissor lift never had any sort of safety certification. If they had a harness at all, it was most likely just dangling by their knees. Whereas now, at least on the job sites I'm on my own sites and neighboring sites that I poke into, you see a better sense of safety, a better sense of guys, making that conscious effort to do something as simple as click into your rail. It obviously it can literally mean the difference between life and death. It takes, 3 seconds to do it. It's a little bit uncomfortable. It's a little bit less efficient, but the benefits far outweigh that.
My first professional job was in electrical safety. So all I did was arc flash. So I'd go into facilities like these were my summers in college, where going into from grain elevators to steel plants to like metal tube facilities where they extruded stuff, plastics facilities, like you name a manufacturing plant, I've been in and around it. And for electrical safety, I've even been in chemical plants. Now those places are a lot scarier than manufacturing facilities. But with each of these, because so in chemical plants, the reason that they're a little scarier is you shutting down certain pieces of equipment actually cause more harm than turning power off, right? So turning power off is a bad thing in those cases because it prevents them from their safety measures. So like in Louisville, for example, I'm going to call it a chemical facility, but they made rubber. So it was a facility for BF Goodrich to make basically all the rubber that goes into tires, and it's like a clear yellow is what it actually looks like. But in those, they had big chemical spheres. I mean, the stuff that goes into rubber is like insane, but they made 75 pound bales of rubber was their end product that then went to be made into tires. But in these facilities, there's a lot of stuff that could not be shut off at all, or effectively a couple megaton bomb would go off and destroy the whole west end of Louisville. So in those facilities, there's a lot of stuff that was very scary because of the chemicals that they dealt with. But in most places, so on the far other side of that, you had a grain elevator. They're yeah, we just shut everything off. We cannot run, an auger for 10 minutes or an hour. It's not going to hurt anything. And we're fine, right? They're just we'll shut it off. We understand, grain and feed, and we're farmers, but we don't mess with electricity. And so those are the two extremes of things that I dealt with, but it was all around safety in that. And it wasn't until 2002 that this became a kind of a known thing with arc flash. So what an arc flash is if you're in a fault, and the majority of faults, 92% of all faults are phase to phase. So that means somebody took a screwdriver and went across two phases. And then the worst case is a bolted 3-phase fault, which means you took a piece of wrought iron and pushed it right against all 3 phases on a conductor, and it hit simultaneously. And I mean, that's a big explosion. But we calculated all the energy levels at a piece of equipment to see how big that blast was going to be. And things as simple as, like you were saying, clicking onto a scissor lift. Now, electricians and a lot of facilities went as far as they just dress all their people in FR gear. So what would happen in a electrical accident is you'd have an explosion, and because you're wearing cotton or polyester in a worst case, right, some tracksuit like you're in the 80s, you'd then shrink wrap. All that stuff would shrink, and you can't get that stuff off. Now you're in a burn ward, and they're scraping polyester out of your skin for months, and nobody ever wants that. So that's on one end. And now most facilities in the industrial setting, they put all their people in FR gear. It's cheap or relatively inexpensive to do that. Basically, any of the garment people will come in, they'll properly launder them because you can't have any chemicals, right? You don't want to put Tide on your
Right.
FR gear to now catch on fire. But simple things like that for safety, where you got a long sleeve FR shirt, FR pants, and then if you need to, if you're working on big gear, you can put on the bomb squad suit basically to go work on main switch gear and all this other stuff. And those simple little things, to where for the most part, guys were getting, 2nd-degree burns at worst. It's a bad sunburn. 3rd and 4th degree are where it's below the skin layer. Now you need to start going to a burn ward. And a lot of these, it happens in the blink of an eye, right? It's super fast, and you're never going to be catching a fireball or an electrical thing. So a lot of these safety measures that have been put in place in the last 10, 15 years are pretty simple, just clicking in to a scissor lift, right? It takes no time, but now it's an automatic reflex, just like going to work. Now you put on your safety glasses, your FR gear, and everything just works. And I think that gets left out because now it's an automatic thing. That change period was pretty difficult. They're guys are why do I have to wear this? Why do I have to clip in? I'm not reaching over the rail. And now it's, because nothing bad has happened, there's also that sense of safety or security and lull of, nothing bad ever happens. So that's the other side of the equation too.
And we kind of touched on that last week on our episode that published today, in the force of habit and the change of habit and how difficult that is. But I think you're right. It's a function of that habit of being forced to do these new safety measures for, say, the last 10 years. We'll just blanket call it. Now it's become habit for a lot of people, and there are a lot of guys who get lulled into a false sense of safety. With that blanket that, okay, we don't really need this. Nothing's ever happened, but you still, especially in construction, but in a lot of trades in general, there's always that blink of the eye shit that can just happen. And that's when you very quickly remember why safety measures are in place. For a real short time in my history, a couple of years, I was a firefighter on a local fire department, and we had a structure fire one night, and I wasn't actually there. So I'm telling this third hand, but one of our guys was donning his, all of his turnout gear with a full SCBA, the metal air pack. Well, someone had pulled the meter out of the DTE housing already, the main electric feed. And he either didn't know it or didn't see it or whatever. He went to squeeze by it, and he kind of turned as he did so. And his air pack actually hit the meter, and it welded his pack to the meter. And the guys were telling me, it was just this giant blue aura around him. Now, luckily, thank God, one of our lieutenants was close enough and saw it, and he literally ran at him. He bull rushed him and tackled him off of the meter can. The dude spent a couple days in the hospital being monitored, and he was perfectly fine. But it just kind of goes back to that point that the simplest things, just walking down the side of a house, if you're not paying attention all the time, it could be disastrous. And that's kind of the point of construction safety, I think, in general, is that it's that 1 out of a million chance, right? And if you can prevent that by wearing your bomb suit, or wearing the FR gear or clicking in on your scissor lift, it's pretty low cost investments in your future.
Yeah, and this is what it comes down to, right? So the initial cost for any of these programs, like to change out your guys from a regular long sleeve shirt, and again, you're going through like Airmark or whoever to get your gear, and the initial like change is, it's a little bit of an investment, whatever, 5-10 grand, could be more depending on how many people you have, but it is, the facility has to put those costs in. But on the other side of it, if a event were to happen, right, and you didn't have that gear, now like just your insurance premiums are going to be, way more than that one event. Yeah, I mean, like, well, and whatever you're going to have to pay in OSHA fines and everything else to deal with whatever the event is because you didn't have this. So by putting it in place, and now your people don't have to change, it becomes an easy thing, right? So by putting like your electricians, especially in FR gear, now it's a very simple thing to move forward with, because you risk mitigated everything like most things in the future, and you're lowering your premiums. You're not going to have to deal with OSHA fines, and just a complete risk mitigation. And there's so many things, right, that we're dealing with negative consequences. We don't always, and it's bad that we have to like negatively reinforce these things through OSHA fines, through the fear of those things, and not the, hey, you're going to go home at the end of the day, right? Like that all these negative consequences are what force people to do things, versus like, don't you want your people to be, happy, healthy, secure, safe at the end of the day? But far too often, it's OSHA fines or things like that ultimately make us do the right thing.
And it's unfortunate, but that's just human nature, right? Because the reality is, economically, you take a hit to institute these programs, whether it's small, big, or somewhere in between. But I can tell you through firsthand experience, to have somebody fall off a building and become a quadriplegic on one of your projects because they weren't being safe, they weren't harnessed, they weren't tied off. That's a horrible thing to witness. It's a horrible thing to get past. It makes you real, in the blink of an eye, think, okay, we could have spent however many dollars to institute this safety program to outfit all of everybody with harnesses and tie down points, and maybe that wouldn't have happened. That cost now, that economic cost, becomes really, really minuscule in the mind of, I would think, most people. It certainly did with me.
Yeah, I mean, that's a horrible tragedy. And I mean, this is why a lot of things get instituted, is on the back of something terrible.
Yep.
And ultimately what we're trying to do is, training across the board should always have an ROI, right? You might not see an ROI from training immediately, but by training and creating habits from your people, right? Whether that's clipping in, wearing FR gear, putting on safety glasses, wearing hearing protection, right? And now how many places do you go to wear a hard hat, safety glasses, hearing protection in some cases are like, it's not even questioned. People are just, it's a normal thing. No one's, worried about it, questioning it. It's what you do. And if you're not wearing a hard hat, now you look like, it's a simple thing that is going to help actually protect you. It's proven statistically, like this is going to make you better. And that's the thing that we need to look at, going forward is, they're really simple things that are proven, safety glasses, hard hats, hearing protection for, again, long-term health. Yes, it's a little bit of investment. And then the same with training, right? That, hey, not only do you have a harness, but like actually clip in. We do trainings. We make that a habit. Same thing with like wearing voltage rated gloves, leather keepers, all that stuff for electrical work, live electrical work, and making sure that it's dead before you actually work on it, is doing those things, by making that a habit, by training, by practicing on actual dead like equipment. Now, when you go into the field, things are a little easier. It's a little second nature. You don't have to think about it. And over the long run, training will always pay for itself. Again, it might not be like that afternoon that it's going to pay for itself, because you have to ingrain these as habits. But by perpetual training, lockout, tagout training, OSHA 30 training, getting your renewals for all that stuff, it's things that you might not encounter it every day on a job site, but by going back and getting retrained every year for a lot of these things, you're going to be better prepared when it does come up in the field.
Yeah. And obviously safety, I think, is the biggest risk mitigation and the biggest, or the easiest topic to pin from the days of the old to the days of now. But I think there's other forms of risk that are less dire consequences to human life, but humongously powerful consequences in terms of running a business. Financial risk is huge, and you kind of touched on the ROI, the return on your investment, which leads to a nice segue to another section I wanted to get to, and one that Dillon, I know you're very passionate about. So I'm going to kind of tee it off for you. But so as a business owner, it's not hard, but it's always a moderately difficult decision to spend money on something like software, for example. My personal example, recently, I've been working with a great group of guys. They've got an estimating product that I'm very interested in. I think eventually I will end up purchasing it. Obviously, that estimating software is not free. There's a lot of time and effort that went into creating it. And so it comes with an annual price tag. And I had the conversation with my business partner at our weekly meeting last week. Just kind of threw it out there as first pass, and after his jaw picked up off the table, we had a good conversation about it, and it was basically left with, well, you're the one that uses it, so if you think you need it, that kind of thing. But return on investment is on something like that is hard to prove in the beginning. So I'm going to let you kind of take over, but as a technology guy, as a heavy software guy, how do you get over that hurdle? Because there is that old school thought that, in my case, we can do this with highlighters and yellow pads and a box of Bic pens, or we could go all the way to their side and do this with, I'm not looking at BIM, but there's a step before that where we can use it, and it's all automated, and there's historical record tracking that I don't have to do myself, and there's all these great features. How do you cross that hurdle?
It is a great question. When it comes to software, I've kind of seen it all, right? In people not willing to, what steps do they take to make and cross really that decision chasm? So price is always what is the first objection. There's a belief that software shouldn't be that expensive, and we've gotten lulled into a everything's free, we don't have to pay for anything type of world through Google, where you do pay for it, you just pay for it in your privacy, right? So it's really, do you want convenience and give up everything on the back end? And that's what Facebook, Google, everything is run on. So in the free world, you're giving it up somewhere else. The second thing is, so with price, you would more than happily pay, let's just take, so in like an estimator, right? 75 to potentially 100 grand, depending on where you are, to hire in an estimator, right? You'd happily pay 75 grand to bring in an estimator into your, organization, versus a, couple $1,000 a month or a year license, right? So like for my case, for surfboards, so like our top end product, design documents a minute, you stack a couple other things to do low voltage and sheets. I can literally create a deliverable for you in 20 minutes from start to finish for $13,000 a year, and it's like $13,500. But you would rather go and hire a BIM technician at the lowest level for 30 grand plus the headaches, plus all your time that's given into it, which you don't factor at all, plus benefits, plus everything else that goes, the equipment, machines, licensing, whatever. And so it's not even a financial decision at that point. You're just balking at the price of what it is, but you don't actually think it's an emotional decision. It's not an actual dollars and cents decision, because when you actually pound down all the numbers, right, for whether it's an estimating platform, most any piece of software, once you're trained on it, once you ingrain kind of the thing, again, there's going to be an ROI or a time period in there for most any software to pay it back, right? Whether that's Revit, from AutoCAD to Revit, going into BIM, whether that's using estimating software from crayons to software, whether that's going from using Revit to our solutions at Cowabunga Studios. It really becomes, any of those things that I've listed off is far more beneficial when you start to actually know your numbers. When you start to actually know what an hour is worth, what rework is worth, how much rework do you do? And the problem with a lot of firm owners is they have no idea what that number is. No idea, right? They know what their top line fee is. So in the design world, I'm just going to use 5%, depending on where you are, what you do. It could be more, but 5% is a design fee. So that goes to the entire construction team or the design team. CM gets 5% based on design value. So if you have a $10 million building, right, you're going to get 500 grand for the full design team to design that building. So that's architect, engineers, everybody, and then it gets broken out from there. What people don't know, so you start going through all of that, right? Could they rattle off what do you get paid per square foot to design a given building at that fee? No, nobody knows that number, right? It's $125 a foot for electrical design. That's, but nobody knows that number. So nobody, most engineering firm owners, even construction, Like I've never run across anybody. They'll give you what it costs to build, right? It's $250 a foot commercially to build this building. It's 300 in hospitals. It's 150 to do a house. It's 100 to do a multifamily, whatever. Like they know those square foot numbers and what it costs to build, but like, what do you get paid to do the thing on the other side? Nobody knows it. So this, as far as like, so one, it's an emotional decision right off the bat. It's an emotional decision because when you run the numbers, software will always beat out whoever you're going to hire to do it. It'll do it more effectively, more efficiently every time, right? Again, so long as the software is built correctly. So there's a piece in there where you have to trust what you're doing, but at the same time, you prove that out, you use it, which is the other thing. Actually have to run it. But then time becomes not a factor, and people don't know where their time's going. They don't value their time enough, and they don't value their sanity enough to invest in something that's going to save them a bunch of time, be more efficient. Like you go down all the benefits, again, whether it's going from AutoCAD to Revit, right? There's a lot of things that just get taken care of. Same thing in like an estimating solution. Again, like you got to make sure that it works, but once that's proven, why not, right? And then the other thing when you look at software is so there's price is usually the first objection, but there's the deeper ones and the things that aren't looked at are how many more projects could you now do, right? In your world, estimating is the holdup to do more projects. Don't have enough estimators, can't look at enough, can't price enough, and estimating will make or break or a construction firm. Anybody from a sub to a GC, if you can't price anything and price it accurately, granted you won't know for 18 months, but
you're done real fast in that case.
But look at how many more jobs you could do, right? Nobody looks at the other benefit side of it. How many more jobs can you price? Because now estimating takes you 1/10 of the time to do it, or it automates it, right? Time is just a no factor. You do it on your couch watching Netflix at night. Like, that's a lot of this is time because it doesn't become a factor, but that's really hard for people to wrap their heads around in that, like, because they've thought about it this way for so long that, like in my case, design documents should take months to do, where I can do them in a half an hour plus some cleanup, call it 3 days, call it a week if you want. I still save you 10 weeks on the project, but that comprehension isn't there, right? Because that is so forward and so distant from where they are today that getting there there's a big cognitive dissonance between the two, right? It's so an objection to their worldview. And this is one of the things to kind of look at. I know I've probably gone on a big tangent, but this is like one of the biggest things in software is that like time becomes a non-factor, but even in construction's a little easier to get it in because everybody understands dollar values and time values of their people. But even like you were saying on your side, right, from the old guard, it's why should we have to pay for this? If it's not a person, why does it cost this much? And it needs to be a shift, but it's really, it's pennies on the dollar for anything you're going to do.
You nailed it. And there's a lot to unpack there. I think the first one, it is cost, right? And you touched on this right in the very beginning was most firms don't really know the cost per hour of themselves. I'll be honest with you. I don't know. I could figure it out, but I couldn't tell you off the jump here what it costs me an hour to build an estimate. I just don't know. And so for me, or for my business partner, more frankly, to look at this software platform that can take my time and let's say it cuts it in half. That's probably bigger than it really is, but let's just say it does. That's a huge chunk of my time, which is now we have to put that value on it. And they're going to do this, or this software is going to do it for pretty slim cost when you look at it. So I think the first thing is definitely that. That's a great way to sell it. I frankly think that I'll use that to sell it to my business partner once I figure out what my number is. The next thing is you got to use it. And that's a big problem that I've seen personally in the construction firm I used to work at. We invested very, very heavily in some really neat software, and it was all for the pre-con side. It was very expensive. We put myself and at one point 2 of my guys through training. We went on trips to meet the developers, to learn more, to immerse ourselves. We did all the right stuff right out of the gates. But then real life took over, and fast forward a year or 2 years, and that software was more or less sitting in a shoebox in the proverbial basement. We had paid all this money. We were still paying money, right? We had signed a multi-year license agreement, and it literally never got touched. No one ever used it. And there's lots of reasons. It's real easy to point and say, well, we're just too busy. We're too busy to do this. There's too steep of a learning curve. People are reluctant to change. In reality, there were ways that we should have done things much differently. But I think that's a pretty common thing, especially with programs that are designed to take, say, a task you do now or that you've been doing for 15 years, for 20 years, one way, and kind of spin it around and change the way you do it, but also reduce the output it takes to come to the same deliverable, the same conclusion. But people get really nervous about that because it's speaking to an intrinsic level in the human that we don't like to work hard, right? We've touched on this last week too. Our brains are wired such that we want to find habitual patterns that we don't have to think a lot. And I'm not suggesting you don't have to think to do an estimate. I would fire anyone on the spot if they told me they didn't have to think about it. But there are portions of it that just kind of become routine, right? There's, doing a takeoff. You could quite literally teach a monkey to do a takeoff. Whether you're doing it with highlighters on a desk or with Plan Swift or one of the 100 other options on a computer, it's pretty simplistic, right? It's tracing lines, it's clicking buttons. But if you could take that process and shrink it down, so now it takes you a third of the amount of time, and while you're doing it, you have this new program that's grabbing the takeoff data from your highlighter, and it's spitting it into an estimate template with your unit rates and your data already loaded, and it's bouncing it back and forth and checking it against historical data, and it's throwing up red flags when things don't make sense. It's cutting time down immensely, and it's increasing accuracy. You have to be able to trust it. And I think that's kind of the culmination of it is people don't trust change. And especially when that change is in the form of a robot, right? Or a software, a computer, whatever it is, there's a general reluctance, especially in our industry. Our industry is not one for jumping on the cusp of all things new in the technology world, right? We lag way behind. So I kind of rambled a bit on that, but I think there's a lot to it. There's a general realization that has to occur that the software, just like the robot or the spot dog walking around, it's not designed to replace a human to get rid of a job. It's designed to make that human more efficient and more effective, among a million other different reasons.
When we talk about commitment, so one of the most fascinating things that I've witnessed in my journey through software is it's just as hard to give away free software, give away free trials, to get people to actually use it as it is for people to pay for it. So it becomes really, when you start to look at that, it's not a price issue at all. Free is very little difference to paid. It's a commitment problem, right? And you have a lack of commitment from leadership, just like you mentioned at your firm, right? They committed to a lot of resources, but they themselves were not invested in the project. They didn't go, they didn't do the training. And this is the other thing, like for any training that anybody ever does, the more successful it will be is if leadership shows up to that meeting. Like, have you ever been to a OSHA training and your boss is there? You're going to pay attention, right? Like that's just the way it is. And a lot of this stuff, leadership for whatever reason, and I still have yet to wrap my head around it because I don't get it. I don't think this way. I truly don't understand it. But once, and you can look at almost any firm for the most part, by and large, once people hit a VP level, they check out on how anything ever gets done, right? They're not in the day-to-day. They don't care. They forgot completely how anything ever got done. And again, there's exceptions to this across the board, but by and large, once people hit that level for whatever reason, they're done. They're done in production. They're done in the day-to-day. They're done caring how anything gets done other than you do it, right? And that's a hard piece to change. And if they did, right, the firms that have, and I've seen a lot of architecture and design firms that their principals, their lead people, invest in technology. There's plenty of architectural examples of this, like Frank Gehry, who invested heavily in technology. SOM back in the day, I mean, it made them huge, right? Like everybody knows who Frank Gehry is. And that's because he invested in technology and like cared about how things got done. Gensler's the same way. So if you want your firm to grow, if you want your firm to be better, leadership, I mean, this is all firm leaders have to care, have to invest in how the sausage gets made, right? You have to be involved in that process. And like I give the example of sausage because it's the thing, right? Like nobody cares how it's done. It's just give me I want some patties, right? Like outside of that, nobody cares. And if you care as a firm leader, and this is who I'm talking to for firm leaders, right? For the people that have the checkbook, that are signing the checks, that are making this happen, you have to be continually invested in using that. And the longer that you are, the more you're going to see your firm grow and prosper. Because once you get disconnected from the production, from that process, you're not going to find these little increments, right? These 5-10% things that compound over time to be extremely productive. And that's, I think, the biggest thing when it comes to it is they might commit dollars because that's easy, right? It's easy to stroke a check. It is hard, or it's outside of their norm to continually be involved in that process once the check is signed.
Yeah, and I agree with you for the most part. I think a big portion of that, especially once you get to the higher levels, is your mindset shifts, right? And you have to kind of shift away from the nitty gritty and more towards the big picture. But I think there's a way to keep the pulse of both, to still focus on your leadership role on the big picture, but still have enough of a pulse in the nitty gritty that you know what's going on. You know what your men and women are physically doing every day for you. And I think it's a difference in mindset too. If you're an individual who's come up from the bottom and kind of grown through the ranks, whether at one company or bouncing around, if you've actually physically done all of these tasks, I think you keep a closer reality of to what everyone's doing every day than if you bounced around and you were a VP at an oil company, and then now you took a job as a VP at a construction company, and you might know how to sell, right? You could be the world's greatest salesman, but you don't know what the hell everyone behind you out in the bullpen are actually doing. And you got to keep that pulse. That's one of the benefits of staying small, frankly, is that, in my case, I don't have the option. I know how to run every aspect of our company from top to bottom because I just don't have the option. If somebody calls in sick, or if we lose an employee or two, or God knows whatever else happens, I need to know that at least myself, I can do everything if I have to for a limited time. This isn't a discussion on burnout and trying to be Superman, but it's all about keeping tabs on and keeping that reality in your head of, what goes on every day. What keystrokes are being made to produce this thing that I now go and sell, and then these guys go and build. You have to know how the sausage gets made. That's a great analogy.
Yeah, it's a much more nuanced piece. You got to be in it. You got to be aware versus completely checked out, and that's really the point here. I think that we can agree on is far too often it's a complete checkout, right? You hit that level and all you're looking is forward, big picture, which I'm all for. That is my forte, is big picture, where we're going. But to be disconnected from day to day, from what people do, from how things get done, that's problematic.
Yeah. And you can't be that disconnected and run an effective company. It doesn't matter if you're building buildings or you're building widgets or you're making sausage. You can't just lose track of what your people are doing for you.
Yeah. And the thing too, to remember in this for, again, at leadership at the higher levels is a lot of these decisions, it's one decision that changes a lot of things, right? To, hey, we're going to use Revit and BIM. Hey, we're going to go through all of our process to make sure like all of our content is correct to move forward, right? Hey, we're going to go through this estimating thing. We're going to do it once. Yes, this is going to be a big investment to do it, take a couple days or whatever to fully go through everything. But once that's done, once this pillar is set and in place, everything else kind of works, right? Then it's tweaks and improvements along the way. Then it's big intensive for when the thing gets implemented. And then it's like monthly check-ins, right? This is not taking all your time. You can still spend most of your time in strategy and sales and business development and all the big picture stuff. But you need to, when you're implementing that thing, to spend the time to learn it, to immerse yourself and make sure that foundation, that initial pillar is strong. Without that, the whole thing's going to crumble.
It's just like building in general, right? You start with the foundation. If you don't have that, you got nothing.
And then the rest becomes, I won't say easy, but it's less time consuming. It's little check-ins. It's a monthly meeting to, keep tabs on everything.
Yep, absolutely. So somehow we're coming up on time already. I feel like we just started chatting today. But you got any last thoughts or last avenues you want to go down while we're still here?
One of the things I think too it's pretty structural in these conversations. We talked about risk, and as a young person getting into the industry, or young in any really endeavor, typically you're more inclined to take risks. You're more inclined to, because you don't know what you don't know. There's a lot of things that you're going to do that are maybe perceived to be not risky. But when you've been slapped in the face a couple times or, whatever, right? There's negative consequences to whatever the thing is that you did, whether that's emotional, like actually physical, financial, whatever, then you're going to ingrain those. And a lot of the things that we have in construction, and from the old timers, the guys that have been in this industry a long time, right? I'm talking 30, 40, 50 years, is they have a lot of ingrained things that they've been hit by, right? Life has struck them, the industry has struck them, and there's a lot of things that they won't do now. So, in a lot of the things that we need to move forward with, it's reframing a lot of these kind of positive things that come up. So when you talk about technology, right, because they've been hit so hard, loss is going to be front of mind. But if you continue to frame things in, this is what we can do with it. This is how much time it's going to save us. These are the benefits. This is how much money it's going to return us, right? If you can say like it's 100% ROI, right? So for my top package, 13.5, you're going to return 100% of that 13.5. Like you're guaranteed to not lose money in a year. I mean, for anything like that, so you're guaranteed to not lose money, but you're also, if you, again, use it, apply it, move forward, you do more projects, save more time, like all the other things that come with it. But it's understanding that as a young person, you're more likely to take risks, to invest in new things, to go and try that new whatever. And as somebody that's had some negative consequences, whatever those might be, over a period of time, you're less likely to invest in new things because it's the tried and true, and you don't want to change.
It's kind of the theory of blissful ignorance versus not being able to unlearn things, right? And it's a topic that you and I touched on way back when you had me on the show as a guest, and that beautiful combination where you can put a younger guy, the guy that has no blinders on yet, right? And it doesn't have to be foolish, but the guy that doesn't have limitations in his mind, put him with the guy who's been doing this for a long time, that he knows how to get the job done, but he's got that blinder on, those blinders that he knows, okay, if I go this way, I'm going to get smacked. When I touch this thing, it burnt me, on a simplistic level. You put those two minds together and you can create some really amazingly powerful things, because you get the best of both worlds. You get the blissful ignorance and the sky's the limit mentality of the younger guy. And you get the rational side, like, all right, hold on a second. Well, yes, we could do this, this, and this. We don't want to do this because the results could be catastrophic. Let's find this middle ground and hold hands there. And that's how we really create as an industry.
Perfect, man. I mean, it's that exact combination. It's an openness on both sides. It's an understanding of where people come from, and then having that conversation. If you don't have that conversation, you don't know. But, again, I think it goes to being open to change, leadership, and taking responsibility for your actions is core values, right? Like, taking responsibility, doing the right thing, being a lifetime student, willing to learn. That really goes a long way through everything that we're talking about.
Like us, share us around, help us out, guys.
And with that, guys, that's going to be this episode of the Construction Corner podcast. And one last note, if you have any topics you'd like us to cover, anything of interest, feel free to message Matt and I. You can find us. All of our links are below in the show notes. And until next time.